when I put that onto my scale of being tall and wide and deep, that's a lot of sheep. And I just don't know if I'm going to love that kind of look. Hi, my name's Mark, and this is Gus, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm sitting down to show you the start of two new projects, both steeked. I get this question a lot whenever I'm doing Q&As or having a Zoom session. There are plenty of people out there who have crafted for many years, covered many projects, but have not yet experienced or tackled a steek. And more importantly, we're going to look at a couple of ways to adapt a pattern to create the garment that you're truly envisioning for your next project. So stick around if you're interested in seeing the start of a couple of projects and the behind the scenes of how I decide what I want to change and what I'll need to do to get the perfect finished garment. So stick around and let's get into it. First things first, I'll address what you may be thinking, which is, Mark, why two new projects when you have plenty of other stuff that you could be working on or finishing? And while that's true, I'm taking a steeking class at my local yarn shop, Around the Table Yarns. This class is led by Peg Mayer, who is one of my absolute crafting mentors. And so I want to be in this class to learn all the wisdom that she has to offer, but I also really enjoy watching great teachers teach. I think that's super valuable as someone who teaches myself, to observe others and gain as much as you can from those mentors in your life. So as part of this steeking class, I need a project. So the first project I chose for this class is Nordic Bloom. This is a Caitlin Hunter Boyland Knitworks pattern, and I think it's really beautiful. And I'm making this for my mom. Many of you have met my mom through the channel. She's been here a couple of times before. So this is a project that I'll use throughout the course of the class for actual steeking practice, but it will also be a beautiful gift that I can pass on to my mom. So the nice thing about a gift is that I'm thinking of the recipient while I make it. There's a lot of love and joy and good thoughts stored up into a project like this. So this is the first project we'll talk about. The second project we'll talk about is the Sheep Sweater by Rosa Pomar. And for that, I have my swatch and my colors selected, and I have some plans, some alterations in mind for how I will tackle that project. So that's what we're talking about today. A little bit of steeking. You'll see these projects again, maybe in about a month or 2 months' time. Once they're steeked, I'll cut them here with you. We'll talk more about reinforcing that steek and what it does. But for today, I mostly want to talk about the changes I'm making either in the execution of the project or in the finished proportions, features, and aspects of the garments. So buckle up. Let's start with Nordic Bloom. Nordic Bloom is designed to either be a cardigan or an open vest. So I've chosen to do the cardigan, but for either pattern, it's instructed that you work a steek. Now, if you're asking, if you're not familiar, a steek is a bridge, a channel of stitches that are added to a garment that will later be cut open. And a lot of people ask, why is that necessary? Why would you want to cut something open? Why do you need to make it in a tube in the first place? And the answers aren't exactly black and white. You don't have to. If you really don't want to steek something, you can work flat. You can work your color work or whatever the texture of the sweater or the project is, working back and forth, right side and wrong side of the project. But for something like color work, people often prefer to work on the right side of the project the entire time. So in this case, we have both colors being carried along for the stranded color work. And when we get to the end, the edge of the cardigan, instead of turning our work over and purling while working the reverse side of the fabric where you're not seeing the pattern, and working the reverse direction of a chart, we're working in the round. We are simplifying things in one aspect by just working the right side of the project the whole time. And in this case, we're instructed to work the ribbing without a steek because we can work that flat easily. It's just knit one, purl one on both sides. After that, before we start the color work, we build a bridge. We add this steek. So I'll zoom in here to show you what that looks like. Here at the bottom of the project, you can see additional stitches. We have the finished edge of the ribbing, and then we get an additional sort of placket here of fabric that is our steek channel. And in my case, I've chosen to keep vertical stripes for the steek. I just want to make sure I'm using my contrast color, my main color, back to the contrast, and then back to the main. And then the edge of the pattern is where you see these little blips of the contrast color. So later on, once this is cut open, the little raw edge of the steek will be folded under, and all we'll see on the edge of the cardigan is this. One column of main color to contrast and back to main. And next to that, we'll have a button band. I'll show you on a finished example. Here on one of my colorwork cardigans, you'll see the button band emerging from the colorwork. If I flip this over, we'll reveal the cut edge of the steek, which in this case is made up of 2 columns of knit stitches, and then they just disappear. That's where the cut would have been. So on both sides of this cardigan front, I have a finished edge with a button band, but when I turn it open, you'll see the steek revealed. For my steek on Nordic Bloom, I could have done a checkerboard pattern. It doesn't have to be vertical stripes, but you want to make sure you're using both colors across the steek so that when it gets cut, both colors are carried as part of it. You don't have one of them just floating loose on the back of the fabric. Speaking of, we'll look at the inside of the fabric. Here, this explains a bit of why most people don't want to work color work on the wrong side. When I look at this side of the fabric, I can't really tell what's going on with the pattern. If we go back to the main side, the right side, it's pretty easy to tell where I am in the pattern, and that makes memorizing the chart or working my round much easier. I'm not staring at a pattern the whole time. Instead, I can just look at what's coming and make sure I'm in the right place. If I were working this color work on the wrong side, I would be way more prone to make mistakes in the color work. So that's one of the biggest reasons we like to steek, is because it simplifies the process of making any sort of color work object. Right, Gus? Right, Gus agrees. So now let's talk adaptations. For Nordic Bloom, I need a steek running the length of the colorwork section. After the colorwork is complete, I could get rid of the steek and start working the rest of the cardigan flat. There's no more colorwork, so then I'm just knitting across the right side, purling back across the wrong side of the fabric. I like to knit. I've talked about this before. When I make a stockinette cardigan, when I make a cabled cardigan, I really like to work the right side of the fabric for the same reasons as one would like to work the right side of color work. I like to look at my cables or look at my texture and keep track of the pattern from the right side of the garment. I know how to purl. I purl more slowly than I knit, so part of it is a speed decision for me. If something needed to be worked flat, I would work it flat and it would be fine. But if I have the choice to work a steek and work some sort of detailed, intricate texture or color work, I prefer to do it from the right side. So in this case, I've made the adaptation to keep my steek running up the full length of the cardigan. So you'll see once the color work stops, it's still connected. I still have a steek. I still have extra stitches here in the center. They're not quite as clear because I lose both colors, but I know where they are. I'll follow that column up later in the process when I'm picking up for the button band. And for me, for my brain, for my hands, for my enjoyment of a project, I like to work it this way. So that's the first adaptation. I've kept the steek all the way up the front of the project. Now that adds a change that I need to make, which is for the armholes. If I had worked this flat, then I would have the front sections, left and right, as well as the back, all separate and worked individually with different balls of yarn, probably at different times. Because I chose to keep things in the round, it means that I need other steeks added at the armholes, because eventually I'll need to stick my arms through the edges of the sweater. So for that, I've got new steeks running at the sides where my armhole will eventually be revealed. And you can't see much of it, but at the bottom of the steek, I have a bound off stitch that secures everything below. And at the end of the process, I'll cut right up this steek, opening up the armhole. And just like the front of the cardigan, that raw edge will get folded under when I pick up stitches for the sleeve. Now, because I've chosen to steek this entire cardigan, it does have one major drawback, and that is, after the beginning of the armholes, the shape of the whole cardigan begins to really shift into a sort of cone. It's not going to give us enough space to try this on. Because of the steeks, there's no space for your arms. Because of the shaping of the V-neck of this cardigan, it's no longer going to fit your chest circumference. So the last chance to try something on would be before adding the armhole steeks. So as long as you've taken your measurements, as long as you have a good pattern or your own notes for the right length and proportions, you can trust that everything will fit after cutting the steeks and finishing the sweater. So that's the start, a little introduction to this steeked project, why I want to steek it, why it's helpful for the color work, and then why I've chosen those adaptations. So I'll continue this project, I'll keep working on it throughout the course of the class I'm taking, and later on the channel I'll be able to show you the reinforcement, the cutting, and then the finishing for this garment. Before I go any further, I wanted to come on and announce the winner of the project bag from Spinning Loft from last week's video about the Around the Table Yarns retreat. And the winner of this bag is Meg Fisher 8079. Thank you again to Paula for passing this bag on to me to use for the giveaway. And for those who are interested, you can see more of Paula's bags, yarn, and designs over on Etsy at Spinning Loft. And Meg, make sure to send me an email at MakerMarkKnits@gmail.com to get in touch about getting this bag to you. And thank you to everyone who left comments entering the giveaway. I loved reading what your favorite part of retreat might be. And while we're on the topic of retreats, social gatherings, and yarn, I wanted to make a brief plug for the Yarn Discovery Tour. If you are in Northeastern Ohio or near the area, or just interested in seeing what's going on, the annual Yarn Discovery Tour is approaching, and there is an Instagram page just for that yarn crawl. The crawl takes place across Northeastern Ohio, and last year had something like 16 or 17 stores involved. I think we have even more stores participating this year. So go follow that account at Yarn Discovery Tour on Instagram. A little birdie told me that they want to get the account to 1,000 followers so that they can go live to help advertise each shop that's participating in this year's tour. So if you're on Instagram, we'd love to see you over there supporting the local yarn shops in my area, in my community. All right, back to the projects. As far as reinforcing a steek goes, there are a couple of different paths you can take, and most of it depends on the fiber content of your chosen yarn. If things are really sticky, really woolly, really toothy, that's for a lot of non-superwash, more earthy, natural wools, you can just cut. You don't have to do anything specific to reinforce the steek, as long as you're not planning on manipulating and stretching and going crazy with the edge of that fabric. Things will stay in place on their own. After wearing and agitating the fabric, eventually that raw edge will start to felt and become even more sturdy. So that's the choice I made on one of these cardigans here, and I'll show it as soon as Gus decides to move. I don't want to rush him off, but he's also getting his beautiful orange fur all over my sweaters. All right, buddy. You good? Psst, psst. Hey. Psst, psst. Psst, psst. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Here's an example of a steek that I've cut without any sort of reinforcement. This was Rowan felted tweed, and you'll see right now the steek is really frumpy and ratty and ugly, but I can go in and do a couple of things to add a layer of finishing to this edge. A lot of people will go in and add a ribbon. So my plan for this steek is that I will add a ribbon to cover the raw edge of the folded in steek. But the nice thing is I was able to cut this without needle felting, without crocheting a reinforcement, without using my sewing machine or hand sewing it. And with wear, it would felt down on its own. I could go in with a needle felting tool and give it some agitation, but I think in this case I want to find a beautiful ribbon to add right over that raw edge. Just in case this sweater were to flop open while I'm wearing it, then I have another aspect, another layer of finishing on this garment. So that's the first type of reinforcement or lack of reinforcement needed for a steek. Just leave it and cut it. And if you're not doing anything crazy with a sticky wool, things will stay on their own. Next up, we have my field cardigan, which I made out of 100% alpaca. This fiber is so slick and slippery and soft that it's not going to stay on its own. If I had a really large steek panel or channel, I could cut it and trust that it's not going to come completely unraveled immediately, but I would need to do something to secure that steek. This is similar to the idea of steeking with acrylic or a superwash wool, where things are so slick and finished that they're not going to hold on their own. So you can steek with anything. You could steek with cotton, you could steek with superwash wool, you can steek with acrylic or alpaca, but then you need to go in and do something to very firmly reinforce before cutting. So in this case, I went through with my sewing machine and I worked a triple stitch just with a setting on my machine, and I did it 2 or 3 times before cutting. I had worked so hard on this sweater with all of the detail of the grains. It was an expensive sweater because I was working with this beautiful alpaca. It's undyed. I just thought it was such a special project and I'd invested a lot in it. So I wanted to make sure before I cut everything open that I was really diligently reinforcing the steek. So I used my sewing machine, I worked a triple stitch, and I think I did at least 2 passes before cutting. And you'll see this raw edge that I didn't cover up with a ribbon or tack down is pretty tidy. Everything did begin to unravel, so I'm glad that I used my sewing machine to really reinforce. And I've worn this at least a dozen times. It gets a lot of wear, a lot of use, and it's stayed very sturdy. I could still go in if I were to find a ribbon that I think matches the project or is a nice addition, and I could add that for a final layer of finishing. And part of me thinks I should start to search for these ribbons and add them to each of my steeked projects just for that final layer of finishing. And the final example I have of reinforcing a steek is on this colorwork cardigan where I needle felt it. This was a fairly sticky wool, but I worked at such a loose gauge that I didn't trust the fiber to really stay in place once I worked the steek or cut the steek. This was also my very first steeked project, so I was terrified. I really didn't believe that there was a way for me to cut it open and trust that everything would stay. So following the advice of Pam, one of the owners at Around the Table Yarns, I needle felted it in place. So for that, I had a block of sort of styrofoam as my mat. I placed the steek portion, this was before the button band was there, placed the steek portion on top of that and used a needle felting tool with about 10 barbed needles to just repeatedly stab the steek until it truly looked and felt like felt. It was compacted on itself to the point where you couldn't see individual stitches, and I trusted at that point that I could just cut things open and nothing would fray, nothing would go anywhere. So that's what we have here, this really beautiful, sturdy column of steeked stitches. Now I will say, in the case of this sweater, I ended up making the sweater far too big. I didn't make a large enough swatch, and I think in the process of working the whole sweater, my gauge shifted. This was one of my early colorwork projects, and the ending result was just way too big. I'm talking 7 or 8 inches too big around. It's still an oversized sweater, but it's now the size that makes sense for me to wear. I'm comfortable wearing it. So when it came time to steek, after cutting and felting the original center of the steek, I moved in about 3 or 4 inches on each edge of the cardigan and cut and felted a new edge. And that is one of the exciting things about steeking. Even if you've worked a project that doesn't require a steek, you finished it and it's just way too big, no matter what material you used, if you have a sewing machine and a way to reinforce the fabric, you can do a little bit of surgery to make things fit. So that's a good bit of peace of mind for an in-depth colorwork project. If I'm using something that I know can steek, it gives me a little bit more flexibility that at the end of the process, if I've made things a little bit too big, I can go back in and customize things, customize the fit to have a garment that I'll actually wear. So that really saved me for this project. And now for my sheep sweater. This design comes from Rosa Pomar, and Rosa is a Portuguese designer. I think when I was reading about this pattern, she was talking about the difficulty of drawing and sketching sheep. And when we look at most sheep, we have sort of a cloud shape with legs and eyes and ears. So she was talking about trying to design and chart sheep that looked more like the Portuguese sheep that she knew and loved. And this is the result. So this is just a small swatch with one of the adult sheep and a little baby sheep. But the pattern itself, it's very fun. It comes with some alternate charts you can add. You can put in a sheepdog, and I'm trying to think, there might be a couple of other things. There's a spot to add your name or an inscription into the color work. I think it's really cleverly designed and thought out. So I saw this pattern when it was released, and what I like about it is that it's not so terribly whimsical. I'm a bit whimsical, I'm a bit silly, a bit fun, but I've talked about this before. Most of the garments, most of the patterns that I look for, I try to find things that have enough classic elements to them that they will stay fashionable, or yeah, I guess I'm just looking for things that I can wear for decades. And there's nothing wrong with wearing what you want to wear. But in my case, especially as a larger, very broad man, I try not to wear things that are too in your face, wacky, out there. Whatever style, and I feel like I have very little style or fashion sense, whatever style I have, I aim for it to be timeless and have enough, I don't know, firm classic elements to it that the things I'm making can be worn and enjoyed, hopefully, for the rest of my life. So I'm all about some whimsy, I'm all about cutesy patterns, but when I saw this, I think something about the sheep, they feel a bit more architectural, a bit more geometric than the whimsical, round, fat sheep that you'll see in some other designs. I didn't immediately jump to make the pattern because I always like to let new patterns settle in case there are any major corrections that are done, or adaptations or ideas other people have for executing them. I just like for those to settle before I jump into a design. So in this case, I saw the pattern, I admired the pattern, I definitely thought this is something I want to make or even something I need to make, but I wasn't ready to do it immediately. And I'm glad I waited, because at this point, I have some ideas for changing the garment, changing the end result and fit to be something that I can wear much more often, and hopefully something I'll enjoy to its fullest potential. A couple of years ago, when I was really trying to bulk up my wardrobe, I went through the year of sweaters, where I tried to make one sweater for every month of the year, working through a queue of beautiful designs that I was very excited about. And the biggest point of that was for me to fill my wardrobe with sweaters that I could wear to work, sweaters that I could wear as I travel, things that I could enjoy, especially when I'm amongst a community of crafters. So parallel to that, I have the desire to have several vests, things that are more warm weather, spring, fall friendly, even summer friendly, because I can't always wear a sweater. So as I was musing whether or not this project was for me, it struck me that I should create a vest version, a slip-over version, using this beautiful chart, keeping the integrity of the design, but in a silhouette, in a garment that I will wear more often and probably enjoy wearing more often. Part of the idea of a slip-over comes to me because I'm bigger. I don't always want an all-over pattern all over. It can be a lot to have a geometric pattern or a colorwork pattern, whatever it is, all over the body of a sweater and all the way down the sleeves. If you're a larger person and you have that same sort of feeling, then you know what I'm saying. I often look at patterns and look at the models pictured or people's project examples, and if I don't see anyone of my size and proportion wearing the project, then I don't quite trust how it might look on me. There are several patterns out there that have a fixed width, whether that's cables or colorwork or more simple texture, and the larger sizes just fill in more around the sides. So if there's a block of texture or colorwork or anything that draws the eye, and it's the same for size extra small through extra large or larger or smaller on either end of the spectrum, it's going to look very different. I appreciate patterns that work the size changes into the design element. There might be a larger chart or a broader chart of texture or color work for the larger sizes. That was true of the granny square vest I made earlier in the summer with Megan, the Agnes sweater vest. I loved that the designer kept 3 granny squares across the front chest. It didn't matter if you were making the smallest size or the largest size, you were just making a smaller or a larger granny square. There was a little bit of space added, sort of plackets on the sides where you joined everything to give even more room and ease if you needed it, but the overall design element and look would be the same for the largest size and the smallest size, and everything in between. So with color work, for larger sizes, you're usually working another repeat of the chart. So in my case, I might have 6 or 7 or 8 sheep across the front of me, where somebody much smaller would only have 3, 4, or 5 sheep. And when I put that onto my scale of being tall and wide and deep, that's a lot of sheep. And I just don't know if I'm going to love that kind of look. So in this case, step 1 is to reshape the pattern to end up being a slip-over, a vest, very similar to the type of vest I'm wearing here, where things taper in a little bit at the arms. It sits pretty much on my shoulder. It's not drop shoulder. It's not oversized. It just fits with 3 to 4 inches of ease. Additionally, I'm working out of a heavier yarn than the pattern calls for. So instead of using a light fingering, I'm using a DK weight, which means my stitches are bigger, my sheep are bigger. So instead of having 10 sheep across my front, I might end up with 7 or 8 sheep, which I think is going to help the proportion for an all-over colorwork sweater. I feel like I've rambled enough to introduce this idea. So I have my swatch, I'll take my measurement from the swatch, and then I'll choose the most appropriate size for the body, and I'll work this project bottom up. So once I get to the depth I'd like, the point where I want to add my armhole openings, I'll bind off a few stitches, and then I'll add stitches at each side for a steek. Just like the Nordic Bloom we looked at, just like some of the other examples, I'll add those steek stitches so that I can keep working the project in the round all the way to the tip top of the project. At that point, I'll be able to cut open the arm openings, and if I do any sort of front neck depth or a V-neck or any sort of shaping at the top, that will also introduce a steek. So I'll cut those open, and I'll be able to do as much finishing, as much shaping as I want to make sure that I really like the proportions before picking up stitches for the armhole openings and the ribbing at the neck. So this project will take a bit more rewriting, a bit more going off script, but it means I'll end up with something that is very specific to my taste and hopefully something that I'll really enjoy wearing. As I work on these projects throughout the course of the class, I'll make sure to come back on the channel, show the progress, and when it comes time to cut the steeks open and do my finishing, I'll be sure to do it here with you to answer any questions you might have or just to bring you along for the finishing of this experience. One of the greatest lessons I've learned from Peg is to really go in and adapt a pattern or make changes that suit your preferences with anything you're making. It doesn't matter how fantastic an example photo looks or how much you love a designer. If there's an element you know you would prefer a different way, go in and change it. Go in and make those adaptations, whether it's the type of sleeve, whether it's the neckline, the shaping through a garment. If there's anything you know you prefer that either affects the process of making a project or the finished garment, then it's worth it to make those adaptations. And if you get in the habit of making these changes regularly, then you'll have your own notes, your own measurements, your own formulas to execute all of the changes, all of these adaptations that you prefer. So all of that to say, I'm trying to be much more mindful with what I choose to make and how I want to change things or adapt things to make sure I'm happy with the outcome. I'm not just thinking of knitting now, knitting today. I'm trying to think of Mark in a year, Mark in 5 years, the life of whatever project I'm making, and what I could do to make it the best it can be. So that's it for today. I wanted to talk about the beginning of these two projects and share a little bit of what's going on in this class with all of you. If you have stories about your own steeking or rewriting or adapting of patterns, I would love to hear them in the comments below. I've got dates for this month's Patreon Zooms in case you'd like to join us over there. And as always, I love hearing from you over on Instagram, on Ravelry, at MakerMarkKnits. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you're an Instagram user, if you're over on that platform at all, I would appreciate you following the Yarn Discovery Tour at Yarn Discovery Tour. We're trying to get that account to 1,000 followers so that they can go live for social media announcements for the yarn crawl that's about to take place across northeastern Ohio. I love a yarn crawl. I love yarn tourism. I love the idea of people getting out, getting together, and supporting local shops wherever they may be. So if you're on Instagram, if you're willing to go follow that account, help us get to 1,000 followers, I would appreciate it. I'm not in charge of the tour, but I like to attend the tour. This is where I live, and so I like to be able to support as many of these local shops as I can. As always, thanks so much for choosing to join me today. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.